Hi everyone, and welcome to another short mini lecture for microeconomics. In today's video, we're going to be covering consumer surplus and how to calculate it by using the supply and demand model. So first of all, what is consumer surplus? Well, consumer surplus is really just the value that consumers receive on top of what they actually pay for a good or a service. So to think about this in real world terms, so let's say we have a Nintendo Switch, and the market price or the equilibrium price is $190. But the most an individual might be willing to pay is $360. Now let's apply those numbers to our supply and demand model and think about this from the perspective of a potential firm or video game store in this context. So here we have our supply and demand model. Our equilibrium price is $190 and our equilibrium quantity is 26. So to think about this, like I said, from the perspective of a video game store, let's say that what this signifies is that we sell approximately 26 Nintendo Switches per day at $190. Now, we can see that the price intercept point here for the demand curve is $360. This tells us that there's a consumer or customer out there that is willing to spend $360 on a Nintendo Switch. Now, that doesn't mean every consumer is willing to spend that much, but this does tell us that there is someone out there who will be willing to pay that much. Now, before we get into actually looking at consumer surplus, I do want to briefly touch on total revenue, which is also going to be important for you to be able to conceptualize and understand and visualize when using the supply and demand model. So total revenue, I think many of you are probably going to already know this formula, but it is found by taking quantity times price. So in this case, it'd be 26 times $190. But we're looking at the supply and demand model. Another way to think about this is to take base times height. So in this case, base would be quantity, and 26 would be our quantity or our base of this square. And then $190 would be the height of the square. So taking base times height or quantity times price gives us a total revenue of $4,940. Going back to our example of us being a video game store, that would be the total revenue that we gain per day from selling Nintendo Switches. Now, the consumer surplus is going to be that shaded, the blue shaded triangle that is found underneath the demand curve above the equilibrium price. Now think back to maybe a geometry class that you've taken. There is no trickery going on here. All that we're going to be doing is finding the area of the consumer surplus triangle. Now the formula for finding a triangle or the area of a triangle is base times height times a half. So think about this a little bit differently. If you have a square, if you want to find the area of the triangle within that square, you divide the square in half. So we have our base times our height times half. Our base stays the same. Quantity is 26, which is our equilibrium quantity. And then in order to find our height, we're going to take the maximum price a consumer might spend on a Nintendo Switch and then subtract the equilibrium price. So 360 minus 190, which gives us 170. And then times that by a half. So 26 times 170 times a half or times 0.5 gives us 2,210. So that is the total consumer surplus. When we look at this example of our video game store selling Nintendo Switches at $190, with the maximum a consumer is willing to spend being $360. So thank you so much for watching. I hope that was helpful. and stay tuned for more content in the future. Thank you and have a good night.